Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Colman Domingo, an interesting case study. I've posted about him before on Twitter. In case you're lucky enough not to know who he is, I guess he's supposed to be this year's Cynthia Erivo, though for the white media he's kind of been a project of theirs in the making for a while. He's a nobody who the white media has decided to use their monopoly to big him up and hype him up and give him some allegedly prestigious projects to work on, and then they can publish all about it in their media, and then they give him some awards so they can claim that he's accomplished, and in return he'll nod his empty head and say, "Yes, boss." GQ wrote about him. They gave his biography as being black, gay, multi-hyphenate. And that term, multi-hyphenate, is significant because the white media has been using that word to describe him for years now. Back in 2018, before the Obamas got on this bandwagon, Domingo was starring in an adaptation of a James Baldwin novel in a project from the same guy behind Moonlight. And like Moonlight, this project revolves around the LGBT lifestyle. Multi-hyphenate is basically a way of saying this guy does a lot of things, but judging by how long it's taken him to get anywhere in Hollywood, it seems he does everything the same way. Mediocre. Though white supremacy likes to credentialize its tools, so you won't be surprised to learn that last year USC's School of the Dramatic Arts began giving so-called multi-hyphenate awards to people, and the first person to get this award was Mindy Kaling. Multi-hyphenate has got to be one of the dumbest ideas to give an award to, but here we are, because this isn't about merit. It's about bestowing instant legitimacy and instant credibility onto white supremacy's tools, which is what awards are meant to do. You have to be pretty desperate to credentialize these tools, or you have to be really desperate to bump elbows with C-list nobodies to come up with this one. Now, you'll also recall Mindy Kaling's brother got exposed as an anti-black racist a few years back, running around in blackface trading in anti-black tropes, among other things. But Mindy Kaling hasn't said much about it. At last year's Multi-Hyphenate Awards, Colman Domingo was there to host the event right alongside her, without a pang of remorse, it seems. But my point is that this guy has been on the white media's radar for a while, and like some of these other immigrants like David Oyelowo, these white media companies have been handing this guy high-profile projects based on him portraying himself as a central part of our story. Or in the case of David Oyelowo, he's made a career out of playing black Americans, from the Tuskegee Airmen to Dr. King. Now they've got him playing Bass Reeves. Next, he plans to play Joe Louis. Nice little hustle he's got going for himself. In the case of Domingo Coleman, he has an upcoming movie in which he's going to play as Bayard Rustin. Now, in this case, the casting actually makes sense. Like Bayard Rustin, Colman Domingo is a gay immigrant. Bayard Rustin's father was a West Indian, though he was raised by his maternal grandparents. Another thing that Coleman and Bayard Rustin have in common, the white media exaggerates and overhypes them and their importance to the point of being ridiculous. For several years now, the white media has been using weasel words to give people the false impression that Dr. King's March on Washington was actually all Bayard Rustin's idea. Though the wording they use is that he organized the March on Washington. Well, that word is so vague it can mean anything, which is the whole point. By omitting and downplaying the fact that it was Dr. King's idea, and in truth, it had been the goal of a number of civil rights leaders for a while, the white media deliberately tries to make it seem as if Bayard Rustin thought it all up on his own, and that he had to drag everyone kicking and screaming to it, while he had to organize it himself because everybody else was apparently sitting back doing nothing, which is not true at all. And they've been carpet bombing the public with this propaganda for a while now. But because white supremacy is sophisticated, they gotta sprinkle in a little bit of truth with the lies. Part of it is they say that Bayard Rustin was an outcast from the civil rights movement. That's meant to push the black community is homophobic trope. Now, there is some accuracy to that. Bayard Rustin did find himself being edged out, but it wasn't because of what he did in the bedroom. Keep in mind, the great writer James Baldwin was also an openly gay black man, and he didn't find himself being sidelined. The real reason that Bayard Rustin found himself on the outside looking in is because that's what he chose to do. Bayard Rustin was never down with the struggle to begin with. The entire reason that he wanted to be involved in civil rights was because he had been arrested in the 1950s for openly gay behavior, and because of that he wanted to make sure that that wouldn't happen again in the future. He saw the civil rights movement as nothing more than a vehicle to get him to that ultimate goal. Bayard Rustin was the original proponent of black fill-in-the-blank coalition ideology. He spent arguably more time advocating for immigrants and non-black groups as the white media would have you think that he did for black Americans. And of course, later in his life, he consummated this break with the black community when he used his status as a so-called advisor to Dr. King to make public statements claiming that racism against black people was pretty much done away with and that homophobia was now the great issue of our time that needed to be fought. In 1986, Bayard Rustin put aside all pretense about his contempt for the very black community that the white media says he stood for. Bayard Rustin had written, "Today, blacks are no longer the litmus test or the barometer of social change. Blacks are in every segment of society, and there are laws that help to protect them from racial discrimination. It is in this sense that gay people are the new barometer for social change. The question of social change should be framed with the most vulnerable group in mind, gay people." Did you get that? Blacks are no longer the litmus test or the barometer of social change. Blacks are in every segment of society, and there are laws that help to protect them. He draws a distinction between himself and black people. There's laws to protect them from racial discrimination. I mean, a right-winger on Fox News couldn't have spouted a lie any better than that one. I mean, this guy was doing the most to deny the very real suffering that black people were still endure to this day. Gays had already been in every arena of society long before black people could even get a toe in the door. As long as you didn't advertise that you were LGBT, as long as you didn't bring your lifestyle partner with you, you could rise as high in society as you wanted. You look up who LGBT icons are, you see it goes all the way back to the doggone 18th century. Gays have always been in positions of authority, always been in every arena of society. He tries to conflate social acceptance with social mobility. That's what he tries to do, and to do that is to tell a lie. What black person has ever had the advantage of, well, nobody will discriminate against me for being black as long as I don't tell them? Bayard Rustin made it a point to deny the basic reality black people endure because, as he saw it, the civil rights movement had served its purpose, which was to make him prominent, and he would now use that prominence to pursue what he had wanted from the very beginning. This is who the white media tells us that we're supposed to put on a pedestal. I hope now it becomes a little bit more clear why it was in the 1960s they were looking at Bayard Rustin and going, you know what, maybe you need to go stand over there. We don't really think that you're down for this fight, because he wasn't. It was obvious from the beginning this guy showed up with an agenda of his own, and it had nothing to do with black people. See, that's the reality of Bayard Rustin and the alleged homophobia in the black community that the white media doesn't talk about. This is what the guy who they're telling you was the leader in the face of the civil rights movement, this is what he was saying while black people were being killed, mass incarcerated, the doggone oppression going on unabated, and he's saying, oh, black people are fine now. Oh, there's laws, there's social acceptance, oh, black people are just fine. It's the gays who you need to be concerned about. By which, of course, he meant himself. Everybody need to be concerned about him. Just a delusional narcissist. That's what this guy was. He was a black man who was subject to being murdered just like every other black person, and yet as far as he was concerned, he thought he could run away from blackness by trying to tell everybody, look, I'm advertising that I'm somebody else. I don't really identify with being black. See, them, black people are being protected. I'm not. But he didn't stop there. He also wrote, that's what makes our struggle the central struggle of our time, the central struggle for democracy and the central struggle for human rights. If gay people do not understand that, they do not understand the opportunity before them, nor do they understand the terrifying burdens they carry on their shoulders. This is how this guy was talking about the black community when he thought that he was in a position where he could do that. How can gay rights have replaced the black struggle when the black struggle never ended? The gay community has certainly made more strides in their agenda than black people have. They've received a gay marriage law, and before that, a Supreme Court ruling in their favor. The Democrats even lit up the White House for that one. Black people, on the other hand, have gotten absolutely nothing from Democrats since the 1960s, and even back then, what little they pretended to do for us, they just applied it to everyone else. We have so many people who try to appropriate and pervert our history and try to compare themselves to us so that they can elevate themselves over us. And for Rustin to lend his melanin to that reprehensible opportunism, which is the only thing he knew he was doing, it only goes to show that he wasn't ostracized from the movement because he was gay. Rustin had shown that he was not dedicated to the ideals of the movement. He was basically out there for himself. He turned his back on the movement. He only saw it as a way to gain social acceptance for his sexual lifestyle. That's what he was concerned about. All of the stuff about race, he didn't care about. Everybody else in the movement stayed on target. And since he wasn't willing to go with them, he got left behind because he chose to be. But there's more. Bayard Rustin was also a relentless advocate for immigration. See, people would try to tell you that his father was West Indian, so that didn't mean much to him because the rest of his family wasn't. But he didn't know his father, right? Then why did he make immigration such a large part of what he did? According to the American Bar Association, Bayard Rustin worked to fight against colonialism in Africa and in India. He was fighting to help people in India. Well, he wanted to end British rule, make it easier for Indians to come to the U.S. That was part of his immigration agenda. And I'm sure that racists like Vivek Ramaswamy, Nikki Haley, Dinesh D'Souza, and Mindy Kaling's brother are very grateful for everything he did for them. Rustin fought to end colonialism in Africa, but not one African nation in all this time has ever reached out to us to try to set up any sort of land or resources or even basic transatlantic coordination so that we can get some international black nationalism going. Instead, they opened the doors for people from Asia and Europe. If people don't respect your help, then you shouldn't give it. Rustin also fought for Southeast Asians to come to the U.S. That means the Vietnamese and Cambodians. He also fought to get Haitian immigrants into the U.S. as well as freedom for Soviet Jews. Well, with all this time he was devoting to helping everyone else, even those from cultures and countries that practice violent anti-black racism, and to help usher in immigrants who bring that anti-black violence here, there was no need for the civil rights movement to sideline or separate themselves from Bayard Rustin. He had already separated himself from the movement. And this is why the white media and so many others of these white organizations are so eager to make him the face of the civil rights movement. And you have immigrants like the Obamas and Colman Domingo trying to help them do it. See, this is why intersectionalism is so dangerous. When you have black people who want to identify with their immigrant background or their sexuality or being a feminist or whatever, then they will go to suicidal lengths to deny the condition that black people suffer. As they see it, they think that they're brilliantly escaping blackness by claiming to identify as something else. Problem is, we live under white supremacy, and these anti-black racists will only pretend to play along with that delusion up until the point it no longer amuses them to do so. Just ask Billy Porter. Now, this Coleman Domingo character has a movie about Bayard Rustin that he's starring in and is going to debut later this year, and you won't be surprised to learn who produced it, Barack and Michelle Obama. In fact, Obama gets a tingle up his leg, or perhaps elsewhere, when thinking about Bayard Rustin because he awarded Rustin the Presidential Medal of Freedom, posthumously of course, though I'm not sure what the award was given for. Kind of like when he gave Biden the Presidential Medal of Freedom. I'm not exactly sure what that was for either, and neither did Obama. But this is what the Obamas are up to these days, family. So for those of you who wondered what rock he and Michelle have been hiding under, if you've been wondering why he seems to have been laying low and why they're not saying a word about or even to black people, it's because Obama is following in Bayard's footsteps. He's advocating for everybody except for black people. And to think some of these DNC shills actually have the nerve to pretend they don't know why black people don't give a rip about Obama and why the Democrats' black voter support is plummeting. And just in case any of the lurkers and losers who troll my channel want to leave some puke-worthy defense of Domingo saying that I'm being too hard on him, well, I judge people by the company they keep. He makes it a point to name-drop Agent Duvernay. That's 3 red flags to me. And what's in a name? I don't know, but when I think of an immigrant named Coleman, I think of Coleman Cruz, who was also an immigrant, and he's also LGBT, and infamously went to D.C. to publicly object to us getting the reparations that we're owed, because he knows that he's not eligible for even 1 penny of it. Look, as black Americans, specifically those who came out of slavery in the U.S., we have to stop making excuses for all these tethers, interlopers, and opportunists who come among us, and who white power props up to work against us. We have Negroes who tell us that we ought to pursue allies, but to too many black people, that appeals to our insecurity. And when people say allies, we think that means friends, when it doesn't. Too many of us refuse to accept the fact that we are a group, and groups don't have friends. Groups have interests. And when a group is being oppressed, and someone decides that their interests aren't about survival, but about sexual access, then that's not someone we ought to regard honorably. Our struggle is about our right to live and our right to prosper, not our right to have what we do in the bedroom be socially acceptable. Bayard Rustin was dead wrong on so many things, and to pedestalize him is not because he fought oppression, but because the oppressors think that he can be useful to them. White power likes to choose winners and losers, and when it comes to history, that is largely determined by whatever people hear the most often. If they're told that Bayard Rustin was the guy who planned the March on Washington one time, they probably won't believe it. But if the white media carpet bombs them with it every single day, regardless of the lack of evidence, then they will believe it, and they'll start to think that's what actually happened. From white media articles to white media movies, we see a total rewriting of the civil rights movement happening right in front of us. We see a man who was never actually down with the movement being elevated to the level of the leader of the movement. A man who turned around later in life and downgraded and minimized the suffering of black people as no longer being important. He's being pedestalized. He was helping white power to dismiss our demands, and he cynically used his brief association with Dr. King as a shield to hide behind. There's been recent speculation that Bayard Rustin was in fact a government agent. And there are those who'll say, well, you don't have absolute 100% proof of that. Let me tell you something. Given all the crap that he was saying and that he was doing, if he wasn't an agent, he'll do until Clarence Thomas shows up. And when you look at Coleman Domingo, you see the white media doing the same thing. This is a man who the white media plucked from obscurity, and now they're trying to see how much traction they can get out of him. Like Bayard Rustin, Colman Domingo has already proven he won't rock the boat. He'll be obedient and subservient. Whatever the white media wants him to do, he'll do it with a smile. For Bayard Rustin, sexual access was more important than his own survival. To him, to be accepted for his sexual orientation meant, as he saw it, all those white liberals he liked to hang out with would look at him as something other than a black man. That was the mission he was on. Bayard Rustin could never be as significant as Dr. King because Dr. King accepted and embraced what he was. He also accepted what he was up against. Dr. King would never deny the suffering of his people or claim that the gay movement or feminist movement or immigrants or handicapped people or anyone else's movement was more important than the black struggle, because the black struggle is the one thing that changes things. White power may have the ability to give the Obamas cash and to reward them for lending their name to these propaganda pieces, but as black people, we have to make sure we tell the truth. Colman Domingo is a case study in why it's not about talent. He's the white media's stalking horse, and he's not alone. This is all part of the white media's ongoing war against black people. A few years ago, they made a movie about Dr. King starring an immigrant with no connection to us. And now this year, they're putting out a movie about a man who they're hoping to replace Dr. King with in the public consciousness. Well, that being the case, since Colman Domingo is so proud of being a multi-hyphenate, actor, photographer, etc., I'd like to suggest a new title for him to add to that list. Useful Idiot. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Codified Trucking, Michael Somners, Frederica Moore, Turk McKenzie, and Donna Cooks. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.